High-profile Guantanamo detainees say they want to plead guilty as they face a military trial. A victory for the American legal system or a legal farce? And what about Obama's plans to close down the detention camp? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. 5 men accused of masterminding the September the 11th attacks in the United States back in 2001 say they will confess to the crimes. The men are on trial in Guantanamo Bay, where they've been held since their arrests. Their move is being seen as a challenge to the US military to grant their wish for martyrdom, as a guilty verdict in a jury trial would result in the death penalty. Rob Reynolds has more.
The alleged mastermind of the September 11, 2001 attacks and 4 co-conspirators told a Guantanamo military tribunal they wanted to confess and face possible execution. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is charged with originating the plan to hijack airliners and fly them into the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon. Ali Abd al-Aziz is his nephew and alleged key lieutenant in the plot. Ramzi bin al-Shib is charged with coordinating the attacks. Mustafa Ahmad al-Hassawi is said to have provided financing. And U.S. authorities say Walid bin Attash planned the bombing of the U.S. naval ship Cole in Yemen and was allegedly chosen as one of the hijackers, but was arrested before he could take part. All 5 say they want to plead guilty and abandon any further legal defense. What's been on trial in Guantanamo is not only the accused, but also the hybrid legal procedure created for them. The military commissions have so far achieved 3 convictions, but they've been heavily criticized for allowing evidence obtained by coercion, including waterboarding. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in June that the commissions were neither necessary nor legal, and the incoming president has already signaled his intention to try terrorist suspects under a more normal legal process and dismantle the Guantanamo prisons.
It is time to restore our moral leadership by rejecting torture without equivocation, by closing Guantanamo, by restoring habeas corpus.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his co-defendants all face execution. They have said before that they would welcome death. But until Barack Obama decides how to deal with the first U.S. war crimes trial since Nuremberg, their fate will likely remain in legal limbo. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera.
Well, it's an important issue, isn't it? And joining our discussion today are our guests in New York, Daphne Eviatar, a lawyer and journalist at the Washington Independent, and that's a web paper focusing on politics and policy. And in London, Merzan Beg, and he's a former Guantanamo detainee. Welcome both. Lots to discuss, as you well know. But first, I'd like to address the events of the actual court appearance of these men. Merzan Beg, what do you think of this pledge for the 5 to plead guilty? A bid to be executed before the new president comes in, do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to try to find out how is it possible that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed can represent 5 of the other people, probably because most of them would have been in solitary confinement. How did he manage to collate this information from them and then say that he's now representing all the other 4? That's a question I think that needs to be asked. Something even more important than that, of course, is that because this is now coming out into the media, into the public arena, does it now somehow justify the existence of Guantanamo, a place that everybody almost has said should not exist, and particularly the legal process, or the illegal process rather, which has these men going through it, from which, of course, they've come to the end of. But remember, it began also with them being held in secret detention sites before they ever made it to Guantanamo, and they were held there for 5 to 6 years in some cases before we ever heard of them coming to Guantanamo, which was 2007. What happened during that period is extremely important, and we need to know what was how the information was extracted, what methods was used, and how much were people waterboarded, after which these confessions are now coming out, because I think it's extremely important that we're having a guilty plea based on all of these past 5 years proceedings. It's extremely important that people try to dig up what happened in the majority of the time of the detention of these people, which was in a secret detention site.
True to say, Daphne Eviatar, isn't it, that many say that accepting a guilty plea from someone who was tortured is just downright absurd.
Right, because they've been through so much, and as we said, over the last 6 or 7 years, we really don't know if that's a voluntary guilty plea. We don't know what kind of coercion they've been under. We don't know what kind of agreement they've had with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. There's certainly been discussion that he's pressuring the others to plead guilty and to kind of have this group martyrdom. It doesn't work well for anybody to just accept a guilty plea and close this chapter. I think that it's absolutely correct that we need to have a real discussion, a real hearing, a real investigation of what happened.
But isn't that just going to make things last all the longer? It's foggy enough as it is, and will that actually make any clear light, shed any clear light on the issue? The judge, for instance, yesterday asked for a guidance on this issue of the death penalty. Nobody seems to know whether or not it could be applicable.
Well, that's what's so amazing to me about this case, and why I think this particular case, or the case of these 5 men, is a really good example of why this military commission process and any sort of special court process that the president would create is not going to work. I mean, first of all, it's taken so long even to get them to the point where they're facing a trial and they're facing a judge. Now they want to plead guilty, and the judge doesn't even know how to handle that because we don't have procedures in place for it. If they were in the regular federal court system in the United States, there are standard procedures that are followed. There are procedures for the entrance of evidence. There are procedures for the judges to take guilty pleas. There are hearings. There's fact-finding. There would be a standard process that would have a legitimacy both here in the United States and abroad, and it wouldn't allow these men to also use the system to make themselves martyrs.
You have to wonder why they didn't just wait for the change of presidency, because it's well known that President-elect Obama is talking about getting rid of Guantanamo Bay and reassessing the whole issue of military tribunals. Merzenbek?
Well, I think, of course, that would have been a point for them to look at. But the reality is that, like we've said before, we really don't know what these men have gone through for them to have now to come to this position for sure and say that we really want to make guilty pleas. They've been tortured, there's no doubt about it. I've met with the lawyers of Khalid Sheikh, and I've been told that he was waterboarded over 100 times. And waterboarding is, in effect, is drowning. In Spanish, it's called tortura del agua, which means torture of the water. If that is the case, that this has happened to this man and the others, then I think that anything that they say has to be completely reevaluated. But like I said before, the fact of the matter that this is happening in Guantanamo now, and people are talking about it as if it's some sort of a legitimate process simply because we have guilty pleas. Let's not forget that prosecutors have resigned from Guantanamo Bay because of the military commission's process that they found to be abhorrent and against everything that they have learnt under the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Okay, well, we know all that, don't we? But then, you know, what do? You can't just let these people go, can you?
Well, I think the reality here is that, look, they have to be subjected to the law as it stands in the United States of America. After all, the United States of America is the country that took them into custody by whatever means they did. And if they wanted to prosecute them, then they should do so in a transparent legal system. To say now that the legal system that exists within the United States of America that has prosecuted people who were responsible for the first attacks of the September, for the World Trade Center, that has prosecuted people and convicted them for the attacks of the Oklahoma bombing and so forth, now for the United States to say that we simply don't have an adequate legal system, it is beyond belief. It makes no sense at all. In fact, it works against the United States of America as far as its attitude is concerned and how it's received in the rest of the world. In dealing with the people in Guantanamo Bay in this way, if there is evidence, that evidence should have been produced and they should have been dealt with accordingly. If that evidence does not exist or has now become negated as a result of that torture, then I think that they need to look at the process of what they did to them in the first place and bring it all out into the open. But to say that now we have no proper procedure, therefore we must keep them incommunicado for X amount of time before we even talk about prosecuting them, I think is disingenuous, and it's telling the rest of the world that this is now a precedent that we can set by which other despotic regimes can follow.
All right, Daphne, so what next? Can the legal system in the United States handle it?
I think absolutely it can, and I think that President Obama is going to be under a lot of pressure pressure to make sure that it does. I think, however, he does clearly have advisors suggesting that he needs some sort of special court system. Some people have called it a national security court. It's not clear to me what that would mean, how that would be different than the military commissions. I think it would be a bad idea. I mean, in the course of writing an article for the Washington Independent about this, I spoke to many, many lawyers, not just liberal lawyers, but conservative lawyers and corporate lawyers and defense lawyers and prosecutors, and even federal prosecutors have all said to me that the United States federal court system has been prosecuting terrorists for many, many years and has a much better track record of doing it than the military commissions have. And there's nothing about prosecuting terrorism that's different than it's been in the past when we've prosecuted for previous bombings, or that's different than prosecuting drug rings or other sorts of organized crime. These people are criminals, and they need to be prosecuted in a way that's legitimate, that appears legitimate, and that will actually lead to a legitimate prison sentence.
Do you think it's likely, just briefly, that this case could actually run its course, that these 5 men could actually see their day in court?
Do you mean in a federal court or run its course in the military commission that's constituted now? I think eventually, I hate to, I can't predict what the new president will do, but I think eventually, yes. I trust that he's open-minded enough. President Obama is, or President-elect Obama is open-minded enough. It appears to me that he's at least considering the broad range of ideas about how these people should be handled. I think that eventually they probably will get a fair legal system, but it's unfortunately taken far too long to get there. And unfortunately, the current administration bungled this justice process so much that it's made it much, much harder to really prosecute legitimately these people because, as we've said, they've been waterboarded, they've been tortured. There's a lot of things that have happened to them we don't know about, and that the United States government has so far not allowed the public to know about. And so it's true that we have to learn what happened to them, and then we have to bring them up on criminal charges in a legitimate way. And it's going to be difficult, but I do have faith that the new president and his advisors will find a way to do that.
All right, well, hang on there both, because we're going to take a short break now, but plenty more still to discuss. When we come back, we'll talk about the legal and the political hurdles facing plans to close Guantanamo. Stay with Inside Story.